Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to this webinar on integrating ERP and PIM with Dynamicweb. My name is Jesper Nordestgaard and I'm a Solution Architect at Dynamicweb. This webinar was presented on the Tech Conference earlier this year, and it concerns integration with Dynamicweb from PIM and ERP systems. During the webinar, I will go through the architecture behind the integration framework. I will show you how it can be configured, both in live and in batch mode, towards a PIM system. In this case, I would use SkyPIM, and an ERP system where I will use NAV 2013. At the end of the session, I will go through some of the more code technical details on the integration framework to explain to you how you can extend this to meet your customers' requirements. Right. The integration framework works on two channels. One is batch, that's normally used for things that doesn't change so often, like product transfers, users, etc. And the other one is the online channel, which is used to extract things that change very, very often and or are dependent upon complex business logic, like, for instance, price calculation in a B2B environment. The live integration, as you can see here, consists of cart data, product list data, and user data sent from Dynamicweb to the back office ERP system once things occur on the site. That is, whenever a product, for instance, is added to a cart or a product page is rendered. And what comes back from the ERP system live is then a complete order with the correct price for this specific customer, and with his or her discounts added to it. The batch part of the integration framework takes care of transferring things like users from the ERP system to the Dynamicweb, and it could even transfer orders as well, orders that for some reason didn't go from Dynamicweb to the back office ERP system, maybe because it was down, or it could be any other number of reasons. It's of course also used to transfer products, currencies, and languages from the ERP systems to Dynamicweb. Integration framework supports a number of integration points that you can adjust to your own needs. On the ERP side, these points are within the ERP system itself, that is the number one here on the presentation, or it's on the connector part, and that's the small Windows service that facilitates the communication between Dynamicweb and the back office system. That's number two here on the drawing. So you can extend these two services to your needs, or you can extend the Dynamicweb live integration part within Dynamicweb, either on the scheduler or on these live events that occur within the system. And this is what this drawing shows you. Now let me give you a couple of examples of how this can be configured and how you can transfer products from a PIM system into Dynamicweb. and how you can work with an ERP system and Dynamicweb. I will now switch to a solution which I've installed on my own system here. Now this solution is the bike shop, and it's actually fed with products from the PIM system, a SkyPIM solution, which I have installed right here. In the PIM system, we have all our data on products, that is product description, images, and the categories that make up this site. And we then, on a daily transfer, move these data to the Dynamicweb system. Now, if you look at the SkyPIM system, it's divided into 3 categories or columns. The first one here to your left is the master list of data, and then here in the middle you have the data selected for the e-commerce site. So these data, these products are grouped in the same way as on the site. So you will see the same groups here as you see here. Now if we browse into the groups here, you should be able to see the actual bikes and how they are shown here on the in SkyPIM. And in this case, we have a bike here with some textual description and some images. And we should be able to find the exact same bike in Dynamicweb. So I'll just make a small search for it here. And you can see they have the exact same bike here. Now, product data is very static. So as mentioned, it's transferred once a day or maybe even just once a week. And that's handled in a batch schedule. To transfer products, you would set up a export out of SkyPIM that would create an XML file that could be imported into Dynamicweb. So if we go to our backend, we can see that we have a simple e-com provider, and I'll just open that. And this e-com provider simply takes an XML file exported out of SkyPIM, interprets it, and inserts it into Dynamicweb. And this is the way products are moved from the PIM system into Dynamicweb. And let's just look at the source here. And you can see the ecom provider points to a folder in my file archive. So let's go back to SkyPIM and let's make a small change on this product. You can see the image here is this bike, here shown in large. Let's try and change that and make an export to verify that these data arrives in Dynamicweb. So I've now changed the description of the product, or no, sorry, the image of the product, and I'll go and make an export. What this export actually do is it creates the file, transfer it to Dynamicweb, and it then executes the scheduled task in Dynamicweb via a URL to initiate the import. So I will just run it now, and it will take a couple of seconds for everything to be transferred, and then it should be available in Dynamicweb, and we should be able to see the transferred image of this particular product. I'll just update this picture here, and there you have it. Same bike, another picture, and an example of how data can be moved from a PIM system to a Dynamicweb system. Next case, which I want to show you, is how we can integrate with Navision. To do that, I have a server with Navision here on my PC. And you can see I have Navision installed. What I've also installed is a Windows service. And this service takes care of the communication between Dynamicweb and NAV. It's called the connector service. The connector service is simply an executable file and a configuration. Now let's look at the configuration. The configuration is an XML file, and it defines the interface that Dynamicweb communicates with. That's a URL listening on a specific port. It also defines a secret key used for data encryption. And that's because we, that is Dynamicweb, want to ensure that data sent from Dynamicweb to back office systems and back again is encrypted, so that nobody can see things like prices and that's sent back and forth, and even passwords to a B2B site. The configuration also points to a connector communication part that communicates with the Navision. In this example, it's called the nav connector add-in, and the nav connector add-in is configured up here. Now the nav connector add-in has a URL to the Navision web service and a username and a password. The nav connector add-in is simply a DLL that resides with the connector service, and it's loaded together with it. Now this is the back office specific part of the integration framework. So if you wanted to communicate with another back office system, for example Dynamics X or Visma Business, you would use another connector. Right, now we have the service up and running. We know the port that it's listening to and the URL to that one. And let's test and see if it all works before we go into Dynamicweb and see how it's configured. To test it, we have a test tool. The test tool can simply execute or send a XML string to the connector and receive its result back. So to do that, we would need to call the connector service, and we do that on the IP address here, and We can then send an XML request to it. In this case, the request is to receive all users out of the Navision database. So I'll just try that, and it'll just take a little while, and we would have a new reply back down here using the test tool. It's still in progress. Right. What we have received here is simply an XML document containing all the users that are in Navision. And I will simply load this document into an XML editor for you to show. And as you can see, we have the users here. There is, for instance, this Sports Myers Furniture using, and let's go and test to see if he's in our Navision. Oops. Just start it up again. Users in Dynamicweb is, of course, customers in Navision. So let's see if we can find a user with this number here, and here is Sports Myers Furnishing. So now we know that we have a working connection between our test scenario here, our test tool, and our Navision. Let's go and see how this is configured in Dynamicweb. And here in the Management Center, I have a node called Integration. And here I can set up live integrations and batch integrations for the integration framework. If we look at the live integration, here I would configure the URL on the connector service using the IP address that we found before and the URL here. And you can see that I'm adding the same secret key, here again test, to set this up. Once this is done, I have everything in place to receive orders and customers and customer-specific pricings in a live scenario from Navision. But I also need to set up a batch transfer of users and products and everything to be ready. And I do that here in the data integration part, or I start doing that here in the data integration part, where I simply create a new import out of one of these templates that we supply. For instance, the user import template. And I'll just create one of those and give it a name. Let's call it tech demo user import. And what this template does for me is it sets everything up so that I can take the data coming out of NAV and insert it into Navision. Now I need to set up a communication channel on this batch environment, and the communication channel could be tech demo, and the URL I have from my test tool. Just go and copy paste that here. The secret key was test, and the user import activity was my tech demo user import here. And now I'm ready to import users from my Navision. And I would do the exact same things for products. And And you now see that I have a scheduled task here called workshop user import tasks. And if I run that one, users will be imported from Navision into Dynamicweb. And that'll just take a while, because what it's doing is it's sending the exact same request as we saw here in the test tool, and it's actually receiving the exact same data, this huge XML document that we also have in here. Right, completed. Now we should be able to find some of the users from Navision in our complete list of users here. And we can just take this one, for example, and go and make a double check. We have a username called Sven Hansen, and let's go and check in Navision if he's there. Just insert that up here and say search for name. And for some reason we can't find him. Is that because I took, let's just search for Sven then, probably copy pasted the wrong thing. There he is, Sven Hansen. I think I copy pasted his email address, and that was why. Right, so these are the configurations needed if you want to transfer data from a PIM system to Dynamicweb, or if you want to transfer data from an ERP system to Dynamicweb. What I'll show you now is how you can extend the code that we provide with your own customizations, and how things are transferred back and forth. So I'll dive into the source code part of this, and I'll set up a debugging session in a little while. What we supply out of the box for the live integration is a Visual Studio solution implemented in C#, and this solution is free for you to manipulate to your own needs. It comes with a set of standard events that implements the basics of a e-commerce site, but you will often find that additional things are needed to build a fully functional site. The solution that we provide can be manipulated, and that's done via these attributes within the source. And I'll just jump into Visual Studio now to show you the details of this. The live integration has a name defined with attributes. It has a number of parameters, in this case a URL, of course, and the security key, also described via attributes. And if I needed an additional parameter here, I would simply add that one here and compile it into the bind folder of Dynamicweb, and it would be available. To show you how this works, I will set up a debugging session in a little while. A subscription event, that is something that I can subscribe to, an event that occurs online, is also defined via an attribute, and in this case you have the Dynamicweb notification e-commerce cart line added event. That is, this event is fired whenever something is added to the cart on the solution. So what I want to do now is I want to show you what happens when I add a cart, or when I add a article to the cart in Dynamicweb. And I'll just find an article here. This green bike, and let's see what happens when this bike is added to the cart. What I would expect the solution to do was to send a request to Navision with this bike and this user that I'm logged in with. In this case, her name is Line, and request a customer-specific price for this user. And then I would display this price to the end user. So what you would have in such a scenario here is that whenever something happens on the website, a request is made to the back office system. And this is something to take into consideration when designing the system. How will this perform? And what would you really need, for instance, to have an online integration, or could you settle with loading the customer-specific prices to Dynamicweb and then have a scenario where you don't subscribe to things being added to the cart? So these are some of the things that you need to take into consideration when designing the solution. But in my case, I have a fully online system, and I want to see what happens when I request a customer-specific price from Navision. To do that, I will set up a debugging session, and I'll attach my integration project here with the ISS service, and you can see it's right here. And I'll attach it like this, and I will now go back to my site, and I'll add this bike to the cart, and hopefully it'll break in Navision, and we should be able to follow the process. So I'll add it to the cart. My breakpoint executed here in Navision. You see that the notification cart line added fired, and I can now walk through my code here to see what happens. Right here you see that I'm trying to build a request, and the request is a simple XML document. And if we look at the request document, you would see that it's an order with the user. It is on this card. The currency is euro, and it's this product here. It's this product here, and the quantity is 1. And I'm now sending this XML to Navision, and I'm expecting an XML document back with a customer-specific price. And there it comes, and I now have a reply back with a customer-specific price for this particular product. Now that concluded my introductional session on integration framework and the communication with PIM systems and ERP systems using SkyPIM and Navision as examples. If you have any questions, feel free to write them now and we can address them.